"Will you buy us, mister?" whispered the girl holding a baby. The lone cowboy looked at the woman. New Mexico, 1889. Turtle Pass. Canvas flapped like torn skin. Dust twisted between wagons and trade stalls. And then, clear as a church bell through the noise, "Can you buy us, mister?" Elden Ross turned. A little girl stood before him. 5 at most. Barefoot, dust-streaked, clutching a baby close. Behind her, a woman in rusted shackles. Head down. Silent. From the auctioneer's crate came a bark. "Next lot. 1 broad, 2 brats. Quiet, healthy. 10 cents starts." Laughter rippled through the crowd. But Elden was already walking. He didn't know their names. Didn't know their story. He only knew they weren't strangers anymore. 5 years before Turtle Pass, Elden Ross had a different kind of silence. One that was soft, not heavy. He lived in Dry Wells then, a town of scrub trees and dust devils, where the sun set blood-red every evening, but the air still held the scent of wild sage. He was a man people trusted. Not because he talked much, he never did, but because he listened. He helped old neighbors mend fences, broke up fights with a single stare, and when the town schoolteacher's daughter came home from her studies in Santa Fe, it was Elden she noticed. An Elden who changed. Her name was Grace Evans. She had freckles and firm ideas about justice, and a laugh that could lift you from the darkest mood like sun through rain. She wore dresses the color of dusk and read the Bible like poetry. She believed in goodness, even when the world gave her every reason not to. Elden had never seen anyone like her. They were engaged by summer. He built her a porch out back, even though she hadn't asked for one. He carved her name into the beam above it and planted sunflowers that bloomed crooked but bright. At night, she'd sit on that porch and read aloud while he smoked or mended tack. When she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, the world felt whole. Possible. And then she left. For a season, just a season. She went to a mission school 2 towns over, run by nuns who taught orphan girls how to sew and spell. Grace said it would only be for the winter, said she had something to give, and Elden didn't try to stop her. He never tried to stop Grace from doing good. But winter came with wind that screamed down the canyons, and then the fire. The convent burned on a bitter March night. No one knew how it started. Smoke blackened the sky for hours. Ash drifted across the prairie like snow. By the time townsfolk reached the ruins, it was too late. No bodies were recovered, only bones in the chapel and a charred crucifix in the East Hall. They said the roof collapsed so fast no one inside could have survived. Elden rode there before dawn, dug through the wreckage with bare hands until they bled. All he found was part of a photo he'd given Grace, the one they'd taken outside the mercantile the day he proposed. Her smile was still visible. The rest had burned away. After the funeral service, empty coffin, closed prayers, he packed his saddle, turned his back on Dry Wells, and didn't speak another word for nearly a year. He didn't take to drink, didn't scream at God or beg answers. He just left, rode south until the names of towns stopped sounding familiar. Ate when he had to, slept when he could. He'd pull work on ranches if they didn't ask questions. Drove cattle, dug wells, never stayed more than a week. Never spoke of Grace. His only ritual was at night. He'd find a ridge or a rock or even just a quiet patch of earth. Light a lantern. Unwrap that scorched photo. Set it in the dirt, just so. And look, sometimes coyotes would howl in the dark. Sometimes the wind would carry distant voices. But he never looked away. Not until the flame died. People called him Ghost Walker. Some said he was part Apache. Others said he'd deserted from the cavalry after killing his commander. A woman in Cross Hill swore she'd seen him walk through a gunfight untouched. All Elden ever did was pay for his coffee and nod once. He didn't seek death. He didn't seek redemption. He just didn't seek anything. Until Turtle Pass. Until the sound of wagons and dust and cheap laughter. Until a child's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Can you buy us, mister?" And something inside Elden Ross that had long been frozen thought Elden hadn't planned to save anyone. He'd stopped in Turtle Pass only because his horse had a stone in her hoof and the sky hinted at rain. The town was little more than a trading square and a few tin-roofed saloons, but they had a blacksmith, and Elden needed a nail for the shoe. He'd tied his mare by the feed trough and was about to walk on when he heard it. "Can you buy us, mister?" He turned. A girl no older than 5 stood barefoot in the dust. Her cheeks were caked with grime, her arms thin as fence posts. She clutched a baby to her chest. Too still, too quiet. Behind her stood a woman with rusted shackles on her wrists and a chain fastened to a post. Her dress was torn, blood darkening the fabric at one shoulder. She didn't speak, didn't look up. Elden's heart didn't break. It simply shifted. A voice from the stage boomed. "Next lot. Hard-working woman. 2 dependents. 10 cents to start." Laughter rose. Coins clinked. The auctioneer grinned wide beneath his curled mustache. Elden stepped forward and placed a silver dollar on the crate edge. The laughter stopped. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, that's... I'll take him." No one objected. No one cared. They were moving on to the next spectacle, a rusted stove, a dog with one eye. The woman was unshackled with a grimy key. The baby barely stirred. The girl followed Elden without hesitation. The woman limped behind, silent as stone. Elden led them away from the square, down the path that curved behind the smithy, toward the cottonwoods at the creek's edge where his mare waited. He pulled a blanket from his saddle and laid it out beneath a tree. They sat without speaking. The girl held the baby in her lap, brushing dirt from its face with trembling fingers. The woman kept her eyes low. Only after Elden brewed coffee and tore off chunks of jerky did the child speak again. "His name's Eli. He don't cry no more." She looked up. "Is that bad?" Elden knelt, poured water into a tin cup, and held it to her lips. She drank with gasping swallows, then gave it to the woman, who took it without comment. "I'm Lily," the girl added. "Mama don't talk, but she hears you." Elden nodded. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He set about making a fire, brewing stew from what he carried. The girl's eyes never left him. The woman, Grace, didn't move, but her breathing slowed, steadied. She was listening even if she didn't speak. By dusk, they were wrapped in the blanket, the children asleep, and Elden sat nearby, knife in hand, sharpening it with slow, steady strokes. The woman finally lifted her head. The light hit her face just so, bruised, bloodied, but unmistakable. Elden froze. His breath left him in a whisper. "Grace!" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her cheek had a small mole near the jaw, just like Grace Evans used to. Her lips, even cracked and chapped, were shaped the same. And her eyes, those eyes he had seen in dreams and nightmares, always just before waking. Couldn't be. It was impossible. She had died, burned in the convent fire. They'd buried her. But here she was, alive, and broken. Elden moved slowly, not reaching for her, only watching. "You're her," he whispered. "You're." Grace blinked. A tear slid down her cheek. Then she pulled the baby closer to her chest and turned away. She didn't speak that night, not as the fire died, not as the wind swept through the cottonwoods. But Elden didn't sleep. Not once. He just sat and watched the woman he thought the world had taken from him, and wondered what hell she had walked through to reach this place. At dawn, the girl stirred with a cough. Her skin was pale, her breath shallow. Elden touched her forehead, burning. He didn't hesitate. He dampened cloths with creek water, cooled her neck, her wrists, forced sips of water between her lips. Grace watched, tense and wordless. She moved to sit beside them, placing a hand on Lily's chest as if feeling for life. It was there but faint. All morning, Elden tended the girl. He rode into town to buy dry bark tea and apple vinegar from a medicine woman who lived by the mill. He didn't explain what he needed, just left a coin on her table and rode back. By noon, Lily's fever broke. Her lips moved as she slept, and when she turned her head, a strand of hair lifted, revealing a mark beneath her ear. A small brown crescent, like a bird's wing. Elden stared. He raised his fingers to his own neck, to the place he hadn't thought about in years. He had the same mark. His voice was barely a breath. "Is she mine?" Grace's head turned sharply. Her eyes locked onto his. She hesitated. Then finally she spoke. "Yes." Just that. A single word, trembling and fierce. Elden closed his eyes. The world tilted. He was a father. He had a daughter. And the woman he had mourned, the woman he had buried in every way a man can. She was alive, here, holding their child. He didn't speak for a long time. Didn't trust his voice. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw Grace watching him. Not with fear, but with caution. She expected him to run, to turn cold, to push them away. He did none of those things. He reached for the baby, held him gently, let him rest against his chest. "This one mine too?" Grace nodded. A single, slow nod. Elden exhaled. "All right then," he said. And it was. They stayed 3 days by the creek. 3 quiet, cautious, healing days. Grace spoke little, but each morning she said more. Each night she flinched less. Her voice, when it came, was low and raw, like a riverbed after drought. She told him pieces. How she'd survived the fire barely. How men had taken her from the convent ruins, thinking no one would look for a dead girl. How she'd been traded, sold, silenced. How she bore 2 children and never forgot his name, even when speaking it out loud meant punishment. "I tried to run 3 times, she said one night. She traced a scar along her forearm. That one was the last. Elden sat beside her, a hand's length away. He didn't touch her, but he listened. And Grace said the one thing he hadn't dared hope. "I never stopped being yours." Then she looked at the children. "But I became theirs too." Elden nodded. "You're safe now." She didn't believe it. Not fully. But she wanted to. And sometimes that was enough. The wind changed on the 4th morning. Elden felt it in the stillness. In the silence of birds that had chirped just yesterday. In the way Grace sat straighter by the fire, as if her body remembered something her mind had not yet said aloud. He rose before dawn and packed quietly. Tied the saddle more tightly than usual. Filled the canteens. Left his rifle within reach. Lily slept in Grace's lap, a faint sheen of sweat still clinging to her brow. Eli nestled in a shawl beside her. Too young to know the world had just narrowed to danger and silence. Elden didn't speak of the fear. Neither did Grace. But they both knew it was coming. They traveled upstream along the low trail, staying close to the brush. Elden led the horse, Grace and the children riding. They reached a grove of juniper and cottonwood just after midday. From there, you could see for a mile in every direction, barren, open land to the south, low ridges to the west. They made camp beneath a cliff face that caught the sun. That night, Lily's fever did not return. But something else did. Elden spotted them at dawn. 3 riders, just silhouettes at first. Then clearer. Hats low, rifles strapped across their backs. One of them holding papers, pale against the dust. They didn't ride like bounty hunters. They rode like men who believed the law was already on their side. Elden didn't wait for them to find camp. He stepped out into the open trail, his coat blowing behind him like a flag of warning. He stood, legs braced, hand near his side but not on his weapon. The men slowed. One dismounted. He was clean-shaven, fine boots, and too much polish on his words. "You Ross." Elden didn't answer. The man unfolded a document. Held it high like a preacher with a Bible. "This woman and her offspring are listed as property defaulted by Silas Carver. Missing since the Turtle Pass auction. Unlawfully removed by parties unknown." He glanced over the edge of the paper. "We're here to retrieve them." Elden stepped forward, slow, deliberate, took the paper from the man's hand. He read it once, then again, then tore it in half, and dropped it into the fire pit. "This is my land, my family. They don't leave." One of the other men, a younger one, shifted in the saddle. The third, older, with gray at his temples, gripped his reins tighter. Elden stepped closer. "You come near them again, I'll send you back without your boots." The clean-shaven man smiled. but there was no warmth in it. "We'll be back, with a warrant, and real law." Elden reached for the rifle on his back. He didn't aim it. Not yet. But he raised it just enough. "Then you'd better bring more than paper." The three men turned without another word. Dust rose behind them as they rode away. But Elden didn't relax. He stood in the trail for a long time, watching the ridge until their figures disappeared. He returned to camp slowly. Grace met his eyes. "They'll come back," she said. He nodded. "With more. With law." He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside Lily, who was drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. She looked up. "Are we leaving again?" Elden shook his head. "Not this time." She smiled, shy and tired. Then she leaned forward, and for the first time hugged his neck. It was brief, a blink of trust, but it lit something in him he hadn't felt since dry wells, since the porch, since before the smoke and the fire and the silence. He looked up at Grace. "We stay." She didn't smile, but her eyes did, and that was enough. They came at first light 3 days later. 10 riders, all uniformed, badges gleaming, rifles ready. Elden saw them from the ridge, distant dust rising like breath from the earth, slow and certain. He didn't wake Grace right away, just watched. This wasn't a warning. It was a statement. He walked down to the camp, where Grace sat braiding Lily's hair. Eli gurgled quietly on a blanket. The world looked peaceful, too peaceful for what was coming. "They're here," Elden said. Grace stood. No panic. Just that stillness he'd seen in her every day since Turtle Pass. She looked toward the south, where the dust rose. Her hands found Lily's shoulders. "Do we run?" Elden shook his head. "We've run enough." They waited by the cabin, a small stone-walled place built in a former hunting hollow. Elden had finished patching the roof the day before. Now it looked almost like a home. The lawmen arrived just after sunrise. At the front rode the same clean-shaven man, Jude Holloway, they called him. Behind him, a county marshal in full regalia. And behind them, 7 men with solemn faces and loaded guns. Holloway tipped his hat. "Mr. Ross." Elden didn't move. The marshal stepped forward, voice loud and practiced. "We're here on lawful warrant for the retrieval of indentured property belonging to one Silas Carver." He pulled a paper from his coat. Thick parchment. Signatures. "You are harboring fugitives, sir. You can surrender them peaceably and avoid further trouble." Elden took the paper. "Read it." Said everything wrong. That Grace was listed as property, not person. That Lily and Eli were under the same status by birth. That Silas Carver had the legal right to reclaim them. He looked up. "This was signed in Elston County." The marshal nodded. "That's where the bond was filed. Elston County's judge was shot last month. The new one signed it." Elden folded the paper once, twice, then tore it in quarters. The marshal's eyes narrowed. "You're interfering with due process." Elden set the torn pieces on the porch. "No, I'm ending it." He stepped back inside and closed the door. The standoff began. The lawmen stayed outside the clearing, watching, waiting. Sometimes they circled the ridge. Once, Holloway shouted that the children would be taken by force. But no one moved. Inside, Elden prepared. He sealed the windows, loaded every rifle, planted traps along the back slope, snares and sharp wire. They had food for a week, water for 2. Grace helped. No questions. No fear. That night, they sat by the fire, children sleeping close. Elden stared into the flames. "If it comes to gunfire..." "It won't," Grace said. "You don't know that." "I do." She looked at him. "You're not the man I lost. You're more than he ever was." He stared at her. "You're not the girl I buried." She smiled faintly. "I'm more than she ever was." In the silence that followed, the wind whispered through the cracks, and neither of them felt alone anymore. But the threat was not gone. On the 3rd day of siege, a boy arrived. 12, maybe 13. Dusty clothes. A red scarf tied around his arm. He rode in alone, a note in his hand. Elden met him at the gate. "They're giving you one last chance," the boy said. Before they burn you out. Elden read the note. It was brief. Tomorrow we come in full. Return the fugitives. Or face what's owed. It was signed Silas Carver. Elden looked at the boy. How much they paying you to carry threats? $5. You want another 5? Depends what for. Elden handed him a second letter, folded tight. Take this to the courthouse in Santa Rosa. Ask for Sheriff Harlan Price. Tell him Elden Ross sent you. The boy hesitated. That far? Double if you ride fast. The boy grinned. Done. He rode off by dusk, and Elden turned back toward the cabin. That night the wind picked up. The moon rose full over the ridge. Inside, Grace rocked Eli to sleep. Lily sat curled against her side. Elden cleaned the rifle again and again, though it needed no cleaning. He wasn't preparing for war. He was preparing for time, buying one more morning, one more hour, one more truth told under the safety of a roof. Because in the darkness he'd realized something. This was the family he was born to protect. Not with bullets, but with the truth, with witness, with standing still when everything told him to run. Because sometimes justice wasn't a gunfight. Sometimes it was just refusing to let evil be called legal. And that he could do. They rode in at dawn. Elden stood in the doorway of the cabin, rifle across his chest, eyes on the horizon. Grace behind him, silent. The children still asleep. The fire low but ready. 10 riders approached, the same from before, only now with more purpose. Guns unslung. Torches prepared. At their center rode Silas Carver, dressed in a long black coat, eyes hidden beneath a wide hat. His face held no anger, just certainty, the kind that comes from getting away with cruelty for too long. They stopped 10 paces from the porch. Holloway called out, "Last chance, Ross." Elden didn't move. Carver stepped forward. "That woman belongs to me, so do the children." His voice was calm, dead calm. "You hand them over, and I'll forget the rest." Elden stepped down from the porch. "She doesn't belong to anyone." He opened his coat. From the inside pocket he drew a folded paper, sealed in wax. Sheriff Harlan Price, Santa Rosa, arrived last night. He held it out. Carver didn't move. Holloway took it, tore it open. His lips moved as he read. The men around him shifted. Carver's jaw clenched. That's a lie. But Holloway had gone pale. It's a court order. From Judge Pruitt in Santa Rosa. He looked at Elden. How'd you get this? I asked. The sheriff's letter was short and sharp. It declared Grace Evans alive and free. Declared her children not property, but persons. Declared Silas Carver wanted for abduction, trafficking, and unlawful imprisonment. Backed by 3 witness affidavits, including one from Ruth Evans, Grace's sister. Carver's voice turned to gravel. Santa Rosa don't rule here. Elden's voice cut through the morning. It does now. Behind the riders, new dust rose. 3 more men, badges glinting. At their head, a lean man with white hair and a long scar across his temple. Sheriff Harlan Price. He rode slowly, flanked by 2 deputies. Their rifles were already drawn. Silas Carver, he said, voice carrying. You're under arrest. Carver didn't move. On what grounds? Murder? Slavery? Unlawful restraint? Conspiracy? He dismounted, walked forward with quiet menace. You ran your game too long, Silas. Selling people under auction tents. Burning names. Hiding bodies. Carver spat into the dirt. You got no proof. Sheriff Price held up a bundle, letters, ledgers, journals. Pulled from Carver's own house by a warrant served that morning. We've got plenty. Carver reached for his gun, but never made it. Price was faster. The shot rang out once, clean and final. Carver dropped, dust rising around him. Not dead, but done. The rest surrendered. The men who came with Holloway dropped their rifles. Some begged. Some swore they'd never known. Price cuffed them one by one, loading them into the wagons that followed. Grace stepped out onto the porch. Her face held no triumph, just relief and weariness. Price nodded to her. Ma'am, we'll need your testimony. She nodded once. You'll have it. Then he turned to Elden. You did right, Ross. Could have gone the other way. Elden looked past him. To the ridge. To the sky. To the place where silence had lived too long. It almost did. The sun rose higher, and for the first time in years, it touched Grace's face without shadow. No chains, no threat, just wind and breath, and the quiet freedom of a woman no longer hiding. Lily ran from the doorway into her mother's arms. Eli cooed from the blanket. Elden stood by the steps, not saying a word, because sometimes peace wasn't shouted. It was witnessed, and after all this time, that was enough. That spring they married on the hill above the creek. No preacher, no audience, just the wind, 2 children, and the cottonwoods in bloom. Grace wore a ribbon torn from the dress she'd escaped in. Elden tied it gently around her wrist like a promise. There were no rings, no vows spoken loud, but everything that needed saying had already been lived. Lily scattered wildflowers across the grass. Eli giggled as a butterfly landed on his thumb. The air was warm, the sky a clean blue, and for the first time since either of them could remember, there was no sound of hooves, no shadow of law, no hunger chasing behind them. They stood hand in hand, 2 survivors, 2 halves finally whole. You were mine, Grace whispered. Even when I couldn't say your name aloud. Elden looked at her, eyes full. And you were mine, he said. Even when the world called you dead. Lily ran to them then, wrapping her arms around their legs. Now we all stay, she said. Together. The wind paused, just long enough to make room for that moment, as if it too understood something sacred had happened. Then it moved on, carrying not pain but promise. And for the first time, Elden Ross didn't light a lantern that night. He didn't need to. The light was already there, living, breathing, home.